There are a ton of PC handhelds that are out there on the market, and each and every single time that one of them launches, it's full of bugs, it's full of issues, and over time they get ironed out. Whether you're talking about the Steam Deck, the ROG Ally, or the Legion Go, they've all had issues. The MSI Claw is no different, but the biggest differentiating factor between the MSI Claw and the rest of the bunch is that the rest of the bunch runs on AMD's APUs or the Z1 Extreme chipsets, whereas with the MSI Claw, you're talking about the Intel 155H chipset. So there are a lot of things to talk about in contrast of the two of them, but when it comes specifically to the MSI Claw, there are instances where there's like this glimmer of like amazingness when everything works beautifully, and then there are some issues that just arise randomly out of nowhere using everything the MSI has provided with this handheld. This video is sponsored by CookTech. CookTech sells an array of battery chargers, but this is their 10 power bank. It has one USB-C port and one USB-A port, and a single port delivers 100 watts to ensure that you're topped off at the fastest rate possible. It can provide 45 watts of charging to the Steam Deck, 65 watts of charging to the ROG Ally and MSI Claw, and 100 watts of charging for the Legion Go. Honestly, this is great for gaming on your PC handheld while you're out and about. I love this TFT screen that comes on it that provides all of the info that you need for the power bank itself. You can see the remaining battery life, how much time is left before it hits a full charge, total input and output power, single port power, current, and even voltage. You can see how fast it charges with a 90-watt fast charge. It's quoted to hit 55% in just 15 minutes. It's about the size of a Snickers bar and weighs 287 grams, but it's great for travel, trips, and just using it outdoor and overall. If you're looking for a power bank to take with you on the go, then click the link in the description below to learn more about CookTech and their 10 power banks. And thanks to CookTech for sponsoring this video. When you're looking at the MSI Claw, you have several options that you can choose from. You have the $799 option, $749, and $699 option. Now, with the $799 option, you have the Intel Core Ultra 7 155H chipset, 1 terabyte of storage, and 16 gigabytes of RAM. The $749 option, though, comes with the same exact thing as the $799, just half the storage, so 512 gigabytes instead of 1 terabyte. And the $699 option comes with an Intel Core Ultra 5 155H, 512 gigabytes of storage, and 16 gigabytes of RAM. Personally, I went with the $749 option. I felt like 512 gigabytes of storage was enough, and if I wanted to expand the storage, I could just use the microSD card slot that's there to store some of the games that are there. And yes, I do know that the location of that microSD card slot is very similar to the ROG Ally, but based off of just using some of the games that run on there, I haven't really experienced any issues at all in the grand scheme of things. Regardless of whichever unit you want to go for, you're still going to get that 7-inch IPS LCD screen, 1080p resolution, 120 hertz, and that is going to be a variable refresh rate. It also comes with 53 watt-hour battery, Wi-Fi 7, Bluetooth 5.4. The Hall sensing joysticks feel awesome, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the issues that I did run with that. A fingerprint sensor that also doubles as a power button, and it'll run on Windows 11. All of this is packaged in a handheld that weighs roughly around 673 grams. Unboxing the MSI Claw is pretty straightforward. Once you open up that box, there's a little piece of cardboard that's there, and underneath that you have the MSI Claw itself. Underneath that, you have some documentation as well as the power brick. And this power brick is absolutely long. I mean, we're talking about almost 12 feet. So there's a little bit of distance that's there if you want to go ahead and game far away from your AC outlet. But at the end of the day, like, I don't think I'm going to need that much distance whenever I'm playing anything. Like, I would be fine with just a regular one, kind of like the Asus ROG Ally or the Steam Deck, where it's long, but it's not too long, and I'm able to go ahead and game however it is that I want. There are multiple third-party adapters that you can go ahead and purchase that'll go ahead and power this MSI Claw. Now, I'll be honest with you, the one thing that I did not like about my unboxing experience is that this thing doesn't even come with a case, guys. The Legion Go as well as the Steam Deck come with a case. And yes, there is an option to go ahead and buy it, but at the end of the day, if I'm going to be paying $800, $600 or $700 to $800 for a handheld, I want to go ahead and have a case that comes with it to protect my investment. So let's talk about the MSI Claw and the overall layout of things. When you're looking at it head on, you have the face buttons that are right here that I have seen some people complain about. I don't really get why, because they feel just like an Xbox controller. So if you're used to gaming on an Xbox controller, this is going to feel right at home for you. Then you have your two analog sticks, which are actually Hall sensing joysticks. And then you have this D-pad that is like man, in order to actually like game on this, it is you're gonna have to put in a lot of pressure, because I don't know if it's the membrane or if there's like springs underneath, but it just bounces right back. Then you also have your start and select button, and then over here you have your quick settings menu that you want to go ahead and change. And then if you want to bring down or bring up the MSI Center, you can go ahead and use this button. And then you have your start and select button. I think it's kind of ironic that this looks just like the ROG Ally in the grand scheme of things, and all they really did was just swap the buttons. So if you wanted to go ahead and bring up the quick settings menu, or the equivalent of that on the on the ROG Ally, you have to push this button. So it's the opposite of that to go ahead and bring that up. And if you wanted to bring up the Armory crate, you know, you obviously push this button and it'll go ahead and, you know, drop, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of the opposite. I found that kind of I don't know, a little cheeky on their part. On the top side, you are going to have your triggers, as well as your left button and your right button. Then you also have your volume rocker, 3.5mm jack, your USB-C port, and a micro SD card slot, as well as a power button that also is a fingerprint sensor. So that's how you can go ahead and log in to Windows. Also, on the back side, you have your two macro buttons that you want to go ahead and program. There is absolutely nothing on the bottom. It's nice and just, you know, flat. Also, true gaming. I want to make sure that you know that I know that this is true gaming, because any other handheld that's out there is false gaming. I think that stuff is so ridiculous. I will talk a little bit more later on about some of the gripes that I have with the analog sticks. This was something that I thought maybe it was just me, but I watched Wolfden's video talking about the issues that he had with the top part of the joystick kind of just like crunching in. I'll get a little B-roll shot of this to go ahead and show exactly what's going on. I don't understand why that's even like that. I'll also talk a little bit more about the testing of the hardware itself. It's just there's a lot that's left to be desired when it comes to that, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the video. Setting up the MSI Claw was just like setting up any other Windows-based PC handheld. It was long, it was arduous, and it was annoying. And I once again needed to dust off my wireless keyboard that I could go ahead and use to log into Windows, because you're not going to be able to access the keyboard, and you're not going to be able to access the Bluetooth menu to connect a wireless keyboard that's based off of Bluetooth. So I don't know if you can sense my frustration, but it's just annoying. It took me almost an hour to completely set up the MSI Claw and start gaming on it. Now, this has nothing to do with Windows. That arduous process probably took, I don't know, like 15 minutes, but the downloading and setting up of all of the drivers that MSI had ready for this handheld to go was long, and honestly, it took a while to get everything set up. This is just showcasing once again that the whole PC handheldscape is beautiful. It's awesome, but Windows just isn't there yet. It still needs a little bit more time before it can actually say that, yes, this is a smooth and seamless experience, especially when you contrast that towards other handhelds that are out there. Now, don't get me wrong, whenever I want to play a game on a handheld and Windows is required by the game in order to run, I typically go with the ROG Ally, but setting up the MSI Claw just brought back all of these negative emotions that I had when I set up the ROG Ally and the Legion Go. It wasn't a positive experience, and I hope that somebody at Microsoft can go ahead and realize that there is a market for this, and that all they have to do is just provide a compatible or a better user experience when it comes to running Windows on these handhelds. When using the MSI Claw, I noticed that it's extremely quiet. The fans are barely noticeable, and when you compare that to the ROG Ally, it's really hard to tell the difference between the two. The main difference that I do see out of the two of them is that with the Asus ROG Ally, that left fan that's there is extremely loud in contrast to the right fan. And I get why Asus went ahead and made that a thing, because once that micro SD card situation came to light, they ramped up that fan curve just so that it could compensate for the heating situation that's there next to that micro SD card slot, in hopes that there wouldn't be any issues. Now, obviously, I haven't ran into any issues when using the micro SD card slot on the MSI Claw yet, but because of that positioning and where it's at, I'm very, very much aware that that could happen to it in the future, but I haven't noticed that as of yet. Let's talk about the MSI Claw or MSI Center experience in the grand scheme of things. I will say that while using this, I love how easy and seamless it is for things to go ahead and just pop up in this launcher without having to actually add them yourself. Now, I will say I uninstalled Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy to make space for other things, and this is still here. So that's something that I will say is kind of like a little bit of a downfall in the grand scheme of things. And as far as I can tell, there's no real way to actually remove this unless you actually go to add game, and then from there it will ask you to look at Steam, and then from there it'll go ahead and add everything that's there. But for the most part, I will say that this kind of leaves a little bit to be desired in the grand scheme of just having things just be automatic. Now, I will say that I do like the fact that everything just kind of goes ahead and runs the way that it should. There are some instances where things don't run the way that they should, but let's say for instance I wanted to download Steam, for instance. I would go ahead and come to this game platform or gaming platforms, and I would click A, and that would go ahead and take me to the actual launcher itself. It's already downloaded, so it just works. But if I wanted to go to Epic, it would go ahead and open up a browser and give me the option to go ahead and buy that. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but there was a little desktop mode that's there. Essentially, if you want to go ahead and move that or change that, you can do that here. But if you go back to MSI, you can actually change that in the control mode that's here. I personally don't really like the way that it's set up here, just because of the fact that, like, when you go into gaming mode, nothing is assigned. Obviously you can change things if you want to. If you go to sticks, you can change the dead zones, and then triggers, you can change that. But I'll be honest with you guys, like, the triggers themselves, they leave a lot to be desired, and I think that this is just a personal thing for me. But you see how, like, it's just kind of like not really curved, and it's just kind of just like flat out. I've grown accustomed to having triggers that kind of just have like a place for my finger to just like sit there and lay. And this kind of reminds me of old PS3 controllers, where like you pretty much just had like a button and like that was it. It didn't really give you anything else in terms of like options. Obviously you can adjust like the triggers and make them hair triggers if you want to. You can adjust the vibration if you want to. You can change the macro keys on the back if you want to, as well as different combination keys that are here. Again, this is stuff that if you want to go ahead and do, for instance, I see that there's an M1 or M2 plus up brings up the virtual keyboard. That doesn't work right now. But if I wanted to do that, I could go ahead and do that, but it's not working. See? So there are a lot of things that are kind of like half baked in this system OS. Now, if we go ahead and go into desktop mode, there's key mapping that's here, but there's no way to actually change the key mapping. I know that I've grown used to actually having the mouse left click and right click actually just be here because of the ROG Ally. You can't change that. It's actually just A and B. That's literally it, which kind of sucks because I would like to go ahead and change that. Again, you can change the dead zones and different combination keys that are here if you want to go ahead and adjust. Now, for the most part, everything runs as it should. There are user scenarios that are here. I've only been using the AI engine. Nothing really matters too much on here. I hate to say this. It really doesn't make that much of a difference in the grand scheme of things. Obviously you can decrease the amount of TDP depending on which profile you go ahead and use, including manual. If you wanted to go ahead and change that, you can. But at the end of the day, you know, there's only so much that can be done. I've been using this and it does a pretty decent job in terms of changing the TDP that's there and the wattage that's actually being consumed by the battery. And it does a good job. It provides a decent enough experience. Now, there are some flaws with this that I've noticed while using this in contrast to some of the other settings that are here. For instance, whenever I was using Control, or whenever I was playing Control on here, I ran into random just frame drops, and I'll go ahead and see if I can get some B-roll to go ahead and showcase that, but it literally just would like stop entirely. That only happened once when I was playing Destiny 2, and when I was playing Baldur's Gate 3, that hasn't happened yet. But again, those are some instances that pop up whenever I'm using that AI engine profile, in contrast to some of the other TDP options that are there. Now, whenever you actually click into the game, it'll take you into the launcher, and then it'll launch the game itself. If you want to adjust the quick settings that are here, you can go ahead and do that. You only have essentially 12 slots. So when you pull this up, you only have the 12 slots that are here, and that's it. You can't add any more. You can't take any. You can't take any away. You can only swap them out. So if you actually click in, you can free up memory, and there's all these options that are here that you can go ahead and use to adjust and change things out, which is nice. But again, I would like to be able to have more options to go ahead and pop up on here, especially if you're going to be going against the command center on the Asus ROG Ally specifically. From there, Bluetooth is pretty straightforward. Wi-Fi is pretty straightforward. When it comes to settings, you have, again, that AI engine that's there, and you can toggle what it actually goes ahead and changes. Then there's the Mystic Light, which gives you more options in terms of what you want to do with the RGB if you want to keep them going. I'm assuming that this is pronounced Nahimic, which is it can provide like an optimized audio experience. This is, I haven't really had any issues with it per se, but it's there. Noise cancellation is there. I had these turned off, don't know why they're turned on, but I don't like to actually have this because I don't like for it to be running in the background and taking up any more resources than it needs to take. And when it comes down to it, I'm not playing multiplayer games on here to and talking to other people. I have noticed that when I booted up, for instance, Portal 2, I was playing that with my son, or Destiny 2, it would go ahead and prioritize the audio of whoever was speaking in contrast to actually having the audio from the game itself. So this is something that I personally just don't like. I like to have immersive experiences whenever I'm playing on the go. So I will literally turn off all that stuff, and that way I can go ahead and listen to the games that I want to listen to and the audio that's coming from it. Media for any sort of like stuff, as you can see, I did go ahead and do a test to go ahead and run some data on that. But from there, if you want to go into system info is pretty straightforward. Live update is where you go, and it'll take a little bit of time to actually, you know, check all of the drivers that are here for this handheld. But from there, once you go ahead and find it, if there's anything that's new, it'll be here, but everything that's installed is like underneath. So from there, you have the MSI member center if you want to go ahead and get service from there, including registration. And general settings are pretty straightforward in terms of what you can go ahead and do with MSI and the center that's there. Now, when it comes to performance, there are a lot of peaks and valleys whenever I'm playing any of the games that I want to go ahead and play on this handheld. For example, when I was playing Control, there were a lot of instances where I would just turn the camera and all of a sudden the frame rate would just dip to the teens in terms of the frame rate. Then there were instances where when I was playing Destiny, where I would be getting a solid 60 to 80 FPS and it would drop all the way down to 30. And there is no real correlation in terms of all of this stuff. It's just showing me that there are just some hiccups that are there. There are some wrinkles in terms of the drivers that need to be ironed out. When I did a little bit of research, I looked at videocards.com and I saw that they had reported on the 135H and the 155H both having similar performance regardless of price. So if you are in the field for getting an MSI Claw, you could probably get the $699 or the $700 version of the MSI Claw and you'd be fine. And in some instances, for example, looking at Retro Tech Dad's review of this, Shadow of the Tomb Raider performed better on the 135H than it did on the 155H. That means that it performed better on the $700 model than it did on the 749 or the 799 model. So once again, it really is kind of up in the air. You don't really know what you're going to get in the grand scheme of things, and there are instances where this works beautifully and you're going to get high frames, but then there are some other times where things just don't work for whatever reason, and that hasn't been ironed out yet. When it comes to the ergonomics of the MSI Claw, it's pretty comfortable. I'm not gonna lie. At first, you know, I compared this directly to the Asus ROG Ally because I mean, guys, just look at them. They're pretty similar in the grand scheme of things. But on the backside, where you have your grips, you can see that the curve that's here is just not that, like, look at that. That's a curve, baby. Like, that's a grip. You can definitely go ahead and game on this for a long period of time and feel comfortable, feel secure. This is kind of like a nice in-between when comparing the Steam Deck to its honestly comfortable ergonomic grip in contrast to this. It's kind of like this in-between point in between the Steam Deck and the Asus ROG Ally when it comes to comfort. Now, I will say that after gaming on this for a little bit, there are a couple of gripes that I do have whenever gaming on here. For example, these buttons, they're so mushy. I don't get why they're so mushy. I don't understand why. And I've talked about the trigger that's here, and especially, you know, you compare that to the Asus ROG Ally, and there's a little bit of a curve that's here. It's not that big, but it's enough to like provide some form of support whenever I'm actually gaming on here. When you compare that to the MSI Claw, it just kind of like just falls off. Also, the travel distance of these things aren't that great in comparison to the other ones. I know that some people prefer that, but I like to have just a little bit. I want that travel distance to be there. Aside from this being like mushy and everything like that. Now, whenever I push up on this analog stick, there's a little bit of just grinding that happens over there, and to me, it's scary, because that means that like you can see it a little bit, and I'll get a little close up on here, but essentially it just kind of just like grinds on it, and it essentially deteriorates the integrity of the analog stick. I'm assuming that over time that's not going to be too big of a deal, but I want things to just work, guys. I want them. I'm paying, you know, $600, $700, $800 for something like this. I want it to work, and I want it to work properly, especially when it comes to things that can't be updated with software. This is something that's literally a design flaw in the grand scheme of things. So I wish that they went ahead and took that into account when it came to the comfort and ergonomic of using this, and just the integrity, the build quality of this joystick. Now, when it comes to the speakers on this thing, they are absolutely amazing. It's probably one of the better overall auditory experiences that I've had on any handheld. Maybe the ROG Ally with its spatial audio with Dolby, but in the grand scheme of things, there's so much bass on that handheld that it almost feels like a secondary haptic feedback to kind of increase the level of immersion. And I'm pretty sure that's, you know, not an actual intended thing, and it's just a happy accident that happened. But I'm so glad, because when it comes to that auditory experience, it's up there on this handheld. When it comes to battery life, it's kind of weird, because I'm used to seeing things from the Ryzen side of things. So with the Z1 Extreme chipset, as well as the custom APU and the Steam Deck OLED, as well as the LCD model, I kind of got used to a specific wattage for a specific level of performance. And with the MSI Claw, it's so much more. Obviously, there's Intel inside, no pun intended. And because of that, there's more power that needs to be consumed. Intel is notorious for consuming more power in order to reach a specific level of performance. That's in part why there's a 53 watt hour battery in this handheld in comparison to some of the other handhelds that are out there. The chipset that's in here just needs more juice in order to get that performance up there. For example, when I was playing Hollow Knight, I was getting around 4.5 to 5 hours on average. And yes, this is me leaving it at 120 hertz and using the AI engine that's inside to go ahead and pick and choose all of the things that are there. And for the most part, things ran relatively smooth. I didn't really run into too many issues. But when I started playing more AAA 3D titles, that's kind of where things started to, I don't know, fall apart in the grand scheme of things. When I was playing Baldur's Gate 3, I got roughly around an hour and 15 minutes. When I was playing Control, I got roughly an hour and a half. And when I was playing Destiny at medium settings, I was getting roughly around an hour and 25 minutes. It's just something that's kind of there. I think that that's just in part of how the driver is and how everything is done right now on this handheld. I do think that as time progresses, things will get ironed out, and that battery life will get extended a little bit more once things get a little bit more optimized. The screen itself does a pretty good job of just kind of like working where it should, but sometimes it takes a little bit of time before I can actually get, especially when touching things that are like down here, where sometimes things just don't work as they should. For the most part, it does a pretty good job, but still, it's something to take into account. Like, you kind of have to like push things a couple of times in order for them to register, especially on the outer quadrants of things. Like taking that down kind of, you know, does some stuff, but for the most part, I wanted it to just work right out of the box. And when I'm using this, there's a little bit of instances, especially like when I'm here, when I'm like looking at things, sometimes things don't work as they should, and that leaves a lot to be desired in the grand scheme of things. But at the end of the day, you know, if you're okay with kind of, you know, pushing things a couple of times here and there, then you'll be fine with it. I saw the same situation happen with Asus ROG Ally with Armory Crate. There were just instances where inputs were registered twice, or just things didn't actually work the way that they should. My assumption is that over time, MSI, they'll iron things out. Intel will iron things out so things can go ahead and work as seamlessly as they can. If you've been following the channel long enough, you know that I'm pretty adamant about making sure that screen colors are being represented properly. So in order to test that, I went ahead and took a picture of this coaster on this mat, this desk mat that's right here with my phone, and I went ahead and uploaded that in this cloud so that we could go ahead and see that here live. Now, when it comes to the actual color representation and how things are pretty close to things, they're honestly pretty impressive. Now, in terms of like real life, if you look at it, there's a little bit of a difference, but I think that that's more tied towards the color balance that is on my camera, which is very different, and that's a whole different conversation entirely. But looking at the color panels and seeing how things are represented, I do like the fact that the reds are pretty much almost accurate. Now obviously if you compare it to like the real thing, there is a little bit of a difference, but not that much. Now I will say the ROG Ally, the Legion Go, as well as the MSI Claw, all three of them have phenomenal screens. Even the Steam Deck OLED has a really great screen. Honestly, the original Steam Deck was the only one that kind of made me think of, man, this is a horrible panel and I wouldn't recommend this to anyone in terms of that. But aside from that, all of the other PC handhelds that have come out have been really great in terms of color representation and making sure that that color is represented accurately. Now, when it comes to different viewing angles, that's really where this thing kind of goes ahead and kind of just wah, wah, all over everything, because it definitely leaves a lot to be desired in the grand scheme of things. Like when you're looking at different angles, it leaves a lot. Now, for the most part, you're going to be gaming like this. You're not going to be gaming like this or gaming like that or this or that or whatever. But it is something to take into account when you're looking at the screen. And, you know, if you're playing next to someone, if you want to go ahead and take turns when you're playing something with your friends, this is something to take into account, because local couch co-op still exists, right? That's definitely something that is a reality. But no, I digress. When it comes down to it, it definitely leaves a lot to be desired, especially in contrast to some of the other handhelds that are out there. Like the Steam Deck OLED just looks awesome from every viewing angle. But again, that's OLED versus an LCD IPS screen. So who is the MSI Claw for anyways? Well, if I'm being honest with you, the only people that I would recommend this handheld to are probably Intel fanboys. I mean, the state of this handheld right now, it leaves a lot to be desired, at least for me. You know, when I'm looking at this handheld, I look at it and I see all of the physical quirks that are there, and then I look at the software that is tied to it, and then just the random peaks and valleys of performance that are there. It's so sporadic that it's really difficult to say that yes, this is a stable platform that you can go ahead and go on to play the games that you want to go ahead and play. But as of right now, with the way that the drivers are, the way that the MSI Center and the software is overall, this isn't something that I could recommend to literally anyone. But if you're interested in getting one, or if you have got one yourself, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on everything. And if you want to hear my thoughts on the Steam Deck versus the ROG Ally versus the Legion Go, then click this video over here. And if you want to hear my thoughts just on the Steam Deck OLED, then click this video over here. And until next time, guys, I will see you on the next one. Peace.